Good morning, Your Majesty, and good morning to all of you who are listening and watching today. And thank you to the Queen Matilda Fund for your kind invitation to speak today. When I was invited to give this talk, I said to myself, anyone can Google the social impact of making music. What can I offer to listeners that they cannot find so easily? The answer is an insider's view of academic debates on music as social action. So I'm going to share with you a few insights and lessons that I've learned from a decade of research and conferences in this field. But first, 3 important points. 1, my specialism is Latin America, so my focus is the international field rather than Belgium. 2, this is a personal view, not an objective summary of the entire field. 3, this is a critical view. I believe that if we're going to understand this topic better and make this field stronger, we need to be willing to question established ideas. It is often stated that music makes kids smarter, but the science is not settled. There is less consensus than you might imagine. Sala and Gobbitt's recent meta-analysis of 54 previous experimental studies found that music training was ineffective at enhancing cognitive or academic skills. They concluded, our study shows that the common idea that music makes children smarter is incorrect. Also, sociologists of music raise questions about the idea of music as a thing that acts or impacts on people. Music is not a single thing. Consider a symphony orchestra versus a hip-hop freestyle. In fact, music is not a thing at all, but rather a process made up of contexts and human relations as well as sounds. So we should not imagine music working like a physics experiment. Music and children are not like 2 billiard balls, one striking the other and producing a
Muziek en kinderen zijn niet zoals 2 biljartballen, waarbij de ene...
Music making affords many possible outcomes without determining which ones will occur in a specific case. Music is much more ambiguous than physics.
Muziek is veel ambiguurder dan fysica.
Music is something people do. So brain scientists and sociologists tend to think about the social impact of music in quite different ways. The stories that become better known tend to come from brain science, because translations of their findings make for good headlines in mainstream and social media. In contrast, a well-known sociologist of music recently summed up his entire body of research as things are a bit more complicated than you thought they were. This is a less appealing message, but an important one to consider. Kids make music smarter, a phrase invented by Sean Powell, gets closer to how sociological researchers see this issue. It also encapsulates 3 key elements of good practice in this field: participant-centered, putting young people in the driving seat; creative, and treating participants as active agents with cultural assets, capable of transforming music, and not as passive recipients defined by lack, waiting to be transformed by an infusion of art. So this kind of critical sociological thinking has practical implications. It points towards the design of music programs. And since it shows music as complex and ambiguous, it also encourages us not to treat music as a magic salve, but rather to look closely at what kind of work we do and how we do it. As the researcher Jenny Henley writes, at the end of the day, music does not transform people. People transform people. And the mechanism for transformation is pedagogy. If we think about effects deriving not from music but from pedagogy, then we may pay closer attention to processes, potentially bringing greater benefits to participants. 2 projects may appear quite similar at first sight, yet have quite different effects due to the approach that they take. Karina Korbel focuses on the difference between group activities and group pedagogy. Group activities are ones that simply involve a number of participants. Group pedagogy explores the distinctive possibilities offered by group learning. What we might gain from learning together that we might not gain from learning apart. One finding from her research is counterintuitive, given that we live in a divided world and music is a symbol of harmony. She argues that group learning offers opportunities for managed conflict and constructive controversy that help cognitive development. Indeed, she suggests that teachers should promote certain kinds of conflict in order to foster reflection and collaboration. This is group pedagogy, and it may afford quite different effects than group activity alone. Korbel's research shows that treating pedagogy rather than music as the mechanism for transformation may lead to more positive social outcomes. It also shows that good practice may be more than simply a matter of common sense. Sociological research often raises questions about commonplace ideas. For example, it's often claimed that collective music making promotes teamwork. This is not true. Collective music making may promote teamwork, or it may not. It all depends on the pedagogy. Another example is an illuminating article entitled, "I sing in a choir, but I have no voice." Music may be a fabulous place to find a voice, but it does not give you that voice automatically. A choir or an orchestra may free participants to express themselves, or it may silence them. Things are more complicated than they seem at first sight. So my title didn't come from a moment of confusion. Rather, it points towards a certain skepticism towards cliches and received ideas. Turning established thinking on its head is not just about questioning existing knowledge, though. It's about trying to build up something better in its place. "I sing in a choir, but I have no voice," tells a hard truth, but only in order to imagine a better kind of ensemble. "Kids make music smarter" is not only more accurate than the usual formulation, but it's also a more productive, empowering, progressive way of approaching music making. Sometimes turning knowledge on its head means approaching the subject from a different angle. At other times, it means being willing to admit that something doesn't work. In medical research or overseas aid, it's vital to be able to say, "We tried this drug or this intervention, and it didn't have the effects we hoped for, so we need to try something different." The same is true for music as social action. The main focus of my research for the last 10 years has been the Venezuelan program El Sistema. Very famous, copied around the world, assumed to be very effective, but subsequently revealed to be both ineffective and problematic. Research has turned this story on its head, showing an apparent miracle to be more of a myth. But again, this kind of critical approach is constructive. We can't improve this field if we don't talk honestly about where its weaknesses lie. As the technology writer and musician Jaron Lanier says in the recent documentary The Social Dilemma, it's the critics who drive improvement. It's the critics who are the true optimists. I'd like to finish with 4 lessons that I've learned from a decade of researching music as social action. Less obvious lessons that might not appear from a quick Google search. Embrace ambiguity and ambivalence. Music is powerful, but its power is neither inherently good or bad. Music can bring people together, but it can also drive them apart. But ambivalence is not a creed of negativity. If we understand that music can be wonderful, but positive outcomes are never guaranteed, then we may go deeper, strive harder, take more care over what we do and how we do it. Ambivalence encourages us to take questions like teamwork and participant voice more seriously. Embracing ambiguity is not about denying music's positive potential. It's about fulfilling that potential. Don't believe the hype. There are myths and cliches in our field, El Sistema being a good example. Yes, music can be wonderful, but too much idealism, too much belief in the power of music can lead to complacency, false assumptions, and ignoring problems. I would encourage you to keep asking questions and thinking critically. Don't take anything for granted. The health of our field depends on it. Idealism is an important stimulus to action, but realism is an important component of good musical social work. The best projects don't claim to be changing the world. Their aims are more modest and realistic. We need better evaluation and more research. For there to be less hype, funders need to reduce the rewards for embellishing outcomes and incentivize honest, self-critical reflection, including about challenges and failures. This also implies a shift in emphasis in evaluation and research. It's important to measure and demonstrate, but we also need more exploration of deeper questions around music and social change. And I would like to see more focus on examining and improving practices, more action-oriented research. The most interesting question for me is not, does it work, but how could it work better? Finally, connect research and practice. Some information that's very relevant to music as social action is ignored in practice. Many projects around the world were created in the image of El Sistema without inquiring deeply into the realities of the Venezuelan program, and many continue to overlook research on this topic. This can lead to problems being reproduced rather than resolved. The reasons for this disconnect are many and complex, but one is simple: time. The pressures and practical demands of musical social work can often relegate research to the margins. Something that would be very positive would be the creation of more time for reflection and more spaces for dialogue between researchers and practitioners. At present, if such exchanges happen at all, they tend to be in the form of evaluation of an existing program. But imagine if more projects were created from the start on a foundation of the latest research. I have two dreams. One is to see more projects based on social goals, with researchers helping to identify an evidenced approach to achieving them and to choose the best musical tools. I also dream of an action laboratory, a space where musicians, researchers, and young people could work together with the aim of benefiting the participants, experimenting with different pedagogies, strengthening connections between practice and research, and increasing our knowledge of music as social action. These kinds of dialogues and exchanges would improve both practice and understanding, but they require investment. So this is another issue that funders need to address. The charity that I work for, Agrigento, has just funded 6 pilot projects focused on connecting practice and research in music as social action around the world. I urge you to explore the opportunities to make these kinds of connections. They have the potential to enrich our field enormously. Thank you very much for listening.